All right, The Grapes of Wrath. This isn't going to be a review because I don't think I could really say anything about The Grapes of Wrath in terms of a review sense or an analytical sense that really hasn't been said about the book before, because it is one of the most well-known American books ever written. So in that sense, to sit here and try and do a review seems redundant and pointless, because I don't think there's anything that I could add. But that said, as I said in my The Shadow of the Wind video, there's more to art than just the content itself. And it's really the book itself, but some of the way it's discussed and whatnot that I want to talk about. So the reason that I didn't read The Grapes of Wrath for so long is, as I kind of alluded to in my last review, my mother absolutely hated this book. I think everybody that I've met has one book in high school that they absolutely hated, and in many cases became the catalyst that stopped them from reading. For me, there was never a catalyst, and like for my mother, there was never a catalyst. But her mortal enemy of a book was The Grapes of Wrath. And any time there was a piece of work to be derided, to be criticized, or to be compared to in a negative light, she would say, well, it's not The Grapes of Wrath, or it's almost as bad as The Grapes of Wrath, or so on and so forth. And, well, it wasn't The Grapes of Wrath for my father. My voice just cracked so badly. Anyway, my father also has an extremely negative view of this book. So I was raised thinking that The Grapes of Wrath is absolutely one of the worst things ever written, and I was very glad when we only had to read Of Mice and Men. In fact, I actually didn't hate Of Mice and Men when we read it way back in high school. For me, for what it's worth, the book that was my mortal enemy in school was To Kill a Mockingbird, though in my defense, I had to read it in elementary school in 6th grade, I had to read it again in junior high in 8th grade, and then I had to read it again in high school my sophomore year. So I was just so utterly sick and tired of that book. I loathed it with a passion. And I have not touched it since, even though probably at some point I'll have to go back and revisit it. But anyway, the interesting thing about reading The Grapes of Wrath now, though, as an adult, is how much I appreciate why my parents disliked it so much, because had I been forced to read it in high school, I would have absolutely loathed this book. It's long. I mean, it's not super long compared to like the stuff that I read nowadays, but for what you would have asked of a high schooler to read, like, holy hell, it's long, it's very depressing, but I think really the thing that makes it the most difficult for high school kids is when you're at that age, you're really looking to forge your own identity. You're really trying to understand yourself. Understand your place in the world. That's why a lot of YA fiction deals with that kind of stuff, coming of age, really establishing, it's a time of firsts in a lot of ways. And in that sense, one of the things that you really look for, or at least that I look for and that I think a lot of people look for, is relatability. One of the key benefits of fiction is that it lets you experience different things, and I think that that's very important. But when you're a teenager, you're too busy focusing on yourself, on trying to figure out who you are, on balancing hormones and whatnot, that something like The Grapes of Wrath, which deals with class warfare and class relationships, which I didn't even know. I knew it dealt with poor people fleeing in the Dust Bowl, but like all the interlude chapters are just so brilliant. Some of the things in there are things that I've been saying, I don't want to say my whole life, but my whole adult life. For example, the interlude chapter where they talk about the banks and coming to take the farm, and the farmer's saying, well, I'm going to shoot you. And the guy who comes to take the farm says, you can shoot me, but I'm not the one in charge. And he's like, well, I'll go shoot your manager. And it's like, well, he's not in charge. It's like, well, I'll go shoot the board of directors. And it's like, well, they're not in charge. I always likened it to canceling your internet. The internet company cancels your internet. So you call, you're mad, but the service rep that answers the phone, it's not their fault that your internet got shut down. The person who flipped the switch on your internet, they're fault the internet got shut down. They're just doing their job. You pretty much got to go to the board of directors, and even then, most of them really are just following trends. Like, corporations are big creatures that move and act in accordance with a sequence of rules, more so than they act within the accordance of any particular individual. While there are individuals who can wield great influence over corporations, to like completely redirect a corporation or to do a lot of stuff, like, it doesn't have that, in command, you can directly go and find the person who did this, because a corporation is not a living being. It is an entity. It is a system unto itself, made up of various nodes and rules that it follows. And while there are people who can change those rules, it is ultimately a system following those rules. So, stuff like that, like the observations on Class, I knew nothing about. I thought it was just about a book about poor people and the horrible, shitty migrant experience. But that it's not just the migrant experience, but like I said, that broader corporate system, that while it's really almost a dual narrative, where you have the interlude sections dealing with the broader scope of everything, the macro view, and then you have the main story focused on the Jodes, which is giving you the micro view. I said in, like, Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out, macro view can accomplish some things that micro can't, but micro gives you more of the philosophical stuff that I'm looking for in books and appreciate in books. And with Grapes of Wrath, it really has both. And I'm not saying it's best of both worlds. I'm not saying that I want every book to be like this, but I think that it was just an element of the book that I had never heard anything about. And that's important because I don't think high school kids can really appreciate, or most high school kids, I should say. I think there are going to be some absolutely that will, but I think the majority of high school kids aren't going to appreciate class warfare, because the majority of high school kids aren't working their way through life, aren't really exposed to a lot of this, and don't really have the context to understand the history of a lot of it. And that's not a dig at high school kids. It's not me saying like high school kids are dumb. It's just life experience. It's just being out in the world and being alive long enough to really appreciate how something affects you. Because I could tell you that as somebody who really hated books dealing with poor Southerners, because I just read so many of them. I mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird, the other Steinbeck that I just mentioned, Of Mice and Men, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, so many of these books, a lot of Faulkner stuff, just dealing with people in the South, usually rural, poor people, just sick of it. A lot of our American Lit stuff I was in high school, because, again, I was a teenager. I could not relate to poor people in the South. But as an adult, as somebody who's working, as somebody who sees a lot of this, what I see is so much of this is happening again today. It's just instead of farming in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl, it's stuff like coding. Coding is basically the great handbill telling you to come out to California, because for a long time, certainly when I was in school back in 2006 to 2010, it was go into coding, get a job in coding. The only way to have a secure middle-class income is in coding. Coding, go into coding. And nowadays there's so many coders, but particularly with AI, which, like the tractors in the Grapes of Wrath, is upending the coding jobs, and now there's a surplus of coders and not enough jobs for them all. And it's causing wages to go down, multiple people applying for the same jobs and whatnot. And you're just seeing the same thing, because a lot of this is cyclical. And that's even though I'm not a poor farmer anymore, I relate to it in terms of the class struggle, in terms of the understanding of it, and how much I see it going on in today's life, but I'm able to do that because I'm older, I'm more experienced in following a lot of these different dynamics in these political situations, where in high school I played at being involved in politics, but I didn't really understand politics. I didn't really try to appreciate things with the breadth that I try to today, the sort of various perspectives and whatnot. So in that sense, and I just really quickly, one of the things that I want to say that really I appreciated about this book was it's not just higher class and lower class, but to a certain extent, there's also a bit of that middle class. And one of the things that I really, really see a lot of in American culture today is, and I actually wrote this down because I was trying to think of how to say it, but I like that the book presents the hatred of a disappearing middle class against the poor lower class, not because they hate the poor lower class in principle, but because they're afraid that if they support the lower class, that same lower class will either come in and supplant them in their jobs and their livelihoods, or, as is more likely, they'll lose what they have and then they will become lower class and they'll all be lower class. The sort of disappearance of the middle class, which you see throughout the book, like the sheriffs deputizing people or the people who had run out and burned down the Hoovervilles. It's not that they hate poor people. It's not that they're implicitly racist or prejudiced against them at their core. It's that they're afraid. They're afraid that they see themselves. They see not just themselves, but a potential for their future in these poor people. And it's so easy when people are in power to take advantage of that fear. It's easy when there's a comic that's just perfect. That's like a guy sitting there with a plate of cookies, and one guy to his left has one cookie and one guy to his right has no cookies, and he leans over to the guy on the left and says, "That guy over there with no cookies wants your cookie." And you see that so much, where the upper class is able to use this fear of the lower class to make the middle class turn their attention on the lower class. And what you see in the book, and what the book repeatedly says and reiterates, is that when people are united, when workers are united, when the lower classes are united, and even the middle classes really are united, that's when things get done. That's when change happens. But all the tactics that are used in order to divide people are so effective at it. And I see it today. I've complained about like identity politics, I think, have done so much to divide people that even for the people who have good intentions behind it, they're allowing this to come in and form as a divider for people that should be uniting. It feels like rather than being in a better, more racially or gender conscious world, people are more divided and hateful than they were 10 years ago. And it makes me wonder if any of this was really worth it, or if it just has been a convenient distraction for the powers that be to divide people who should be on the same side class-wise, but because you can just find other ways to divide them, it's easy to separate us out when we should be one. We should be united, especially with the wealth gap gets bigger and bigger, and these imbalances come on, and people's rights are being stripped away from them. We need to be united, not arguing amongst ourselves, because we have more in common than we do against each other. And seeing that play out in this book was great. Even though it's so different, it's different, but it's the exact same. And that's where, as an adult reading this book, I can see that. But as a high schooler reading this book, with the limited experience that I had in my life at the time, that say the limited experience that my mother had at the time, or my father, I can see how you would completely miss that, or not really care. You wouldn't be able to relate to that, because what you really need is an educator who is capable of bringing that to you and relating it to you. And this kind of gets a little bit into education a bit, but this is where I'm talking about art doesn't necessarily have to be about the art itself, but it can be about the conversations or the thoughts that it generates into you. Because the question is, okay, like I said at the start, art can make you relate to things, but sometimes it's that unrelatability that makes something not work. Or, so like I said, art can make you relate to things that you wouldn't otherwise appreciate. Like I've talked about a lot in my reviews of Roberto Bolaño, By Night in Chile, The Stolen Bicycle, even Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out, bringing to my attention these sort of political struggles of these countries that we never talked about in class. But at the same time, people who struggle to relate, to connect with the story, like a lot of high school kids, then not only do they not get anything from the book, but they tend to come away with not just a dislike of the book, but a dislike of reading in general. Like I said, my mother avoided that, and my father did to a certain extent, but I know a lot of people who read, like, The Catcher in the Rye, and that was the book that broke them. And they no longer wanted to read after that. Or, Huckleberry Finn. Like, just various books that they read them, and then that was the last straw, and they were done reading. But so the question is, if the themes... Okay, and I guess to add one other thing. So I was thinking, my thought was, okay, maybe Grapes of Wrath shouldn't be a high school book. Maybe it's just, the kids aren't ready to learn it. And the problem with that, though, I was thinking, like, okay, maybe To Kill a Mockingbird is great because, racial prejudice is something that absolutely they will have experienced or should have observed by that point. So they should be able to appreciate To Kill a Mockingbird. Or, some other book that deals with themes of race and identity and things like that. But at the same time, you need to teach students. I rally against the education system for failing, for talking about the USSR and Mao's China and North Korea in terms of the communist dictatorships, but to never teach about the capitalist dictatorships that went on in Taiwan, South Korea, and Chile, for example. So in that sense, like, the education side is clearly important. So the question becomes, how do you teach something like The Grapes of Wrath to a group of students who don't have that experience? And I think this is where there is no, obviously, like a lot of life, like a lot of art, and this is why art is so great, there is no right answer. There are wrong answers, but there is no right answer. And it calls to mind the best experience I ever had with a book in school was 1984. Or, sorry, not 1984, Animal Farm. Because we did not, in English class, we did not just read Animal Farm and talk about the USSR. We went through a comprehensive history of the rise of communism. We talked about how the book related and reflected communism in reality. So it wasn't just a book that we were reading, but it was also understanding the history of communism. And in that sense, the teacher managed to take something that would have normally felt distant and unconnected and make it feel relevant to us as students. And that was an absolutely fantastic teacher doing an absolutely fantastic lesson plan, an absolutely fantastic unit, and absolute kudos to him, because teaching right now is one of the absolute most difficult things to do because of all the restrictions that are being placed on teachers, and the fact that teachers are hated by parents, teachers are hated by administrators, teachers are hated by students. Like, it is a job where everything that can be wrong is going wrong. I mean, the irony, the absolute, and this ties into Grapes of Wrath in the sense that it's the sort of class warfare. Like, the absolute fucking bizarre thing about teaching is, in capitalism, it's supposed to be, well, if the job sucks, people quit. And people are quitting. They can't get enough fucking teachers to teach. But rather than raising wages, rather than giving teachers more freedom to teach in the classroom, which, by the way, wages were, for a long time, teachers' biggest concerns, but that's not even the biggest concern for teachers anymore. It's parents and the freedom to teach what they want to teach in the classroom. has gotten so restrictive that has overtaken the fact that teachers get paid shit for what they do. And again, like, teachers are quitting and quitting and quitting, but rather than this being a thing where it's like, okay, well, what needs to be done is that we need to stop putting so much pressure on teachers, we need to pay them more, we need to give them more freedom in the classroom. Instead, they keep lowering the standards to get more teachers in, but they're lower quality teachers. They don't have the same qualifications. And, I could dunk on them and call them shitty teachers, but, who knows? Who's to say that if they weren't required to get the qualifications, they couldn't become, perfectly reasonable teachers? I don't know, but the point is they are less qualified, and they come in and they do a bad job, and parents get mad at them, and admin gets mad at them, and the respect for the job drops, and then the pay drops and whatnot. And there's so much corruption in admin too, like all the time that a story from where I used to work at a district that I used to work in was state agreed to pass a new funding education bill. First thing that the principal of our school did was buy a new truck on the school's dime, write it off as a promotional thing for the school. And this is the shit that happens when you vote to raise money for schools, but then you don't have any system in place to actually ensure that the money goes to the classrooms or goes to the teachers or goes where it's supposed to go, because admin on the board and everything is so corrupt. And it's so important. And it's weird that I'm sitting here talking about educational standards and my experiences in education and whatnot, instead of reviewing the Grapes of Wrath, but this is exactly what the Grapes of Wrath is talking about. This is what the Grapes of Wrath is about. It's about class warfare. It's about how the workers are the ones who are getting shafted every single step of the fucking way. And you see this in art too. Like, let's take something like Netflix or Amazon, where as people, understandably, like, because of inflation and things like that, like we are used to getting ripped the fuck off for everything. So I place less blame on the people, but there is some blame because we don't like to pay what things are worth in most cases. Paying full price for a book, paying like $35 for a new book, paying $45 for a new book, even paying like $20 for a new movie. Fuck that. You can pay for Netflix for 1 month for $20 and get access to so many movies. But the thing is, that's not feasible. Realistically, when you think about what goes into making a movie, what goes into making a game and whatnot, what you're actually paying for it does not even remotely cover the cost. But, it doesn't help then that on the flip side, publishers are also doing everything they can to rip everyone else off. Whether it's like in games, endless DLC content, shipping incomplete products, or in movies, it's, churning out garbage. It's like this endless sequel bait and playing it safe and non-confrontational things. And the thing is, ultimately, you've got this push and pull between people who understandably, I'm more sympathetic to the people, to the consumers, but it has to be said that consumers don't really want to pay what things are worth at this point. Art has been devalued so much that people do not want to pay even a reasonable price for something. Well, on the flip side, you've got these producers who are trying to price gouge the ever-loving shit out of consumers for every last dime. And who's in the middle? Who's in the middle getting nothing out of this, winning nothing out of this? It's the writers, it's the creators, it's the developers, and it's your laborers. And this is what you see, like with food production in the Grapes of Wrath. We want cheaper food. Companies want to produce as much as possible. So the end result is farmers get fucked. And this is the important thing to recognize with capitalism, is if a deal is too good to be true, if a deal is too good to be true, someone's getting fucked along the way. And you need to watch out for that. And I place most of the blame on big companies, But there is, I think, like an impetus on us to be conscious of it as well, because otherwise it becomes too easy to take the good things for granted, and then you end up inciting the lower class and the working class into a riot. And rather than being allies with the people who want really just a better life and better working condition, you find yourself allied with the people who are taking advantage of them and driving them into the dirt. And that's something to really be conscious about. And this isn't like a mass condemnation. It's not me making a huge political statement that you have to buy indie and pay full price for everything and whatnot. So much as it is, what Grapes of Wrath really is about being aware of the processes of capitalism and class warfare, and the people who get screwed along the way, and the people who make money along the way. And by reading this book, what it really strikes to me is that like the single most depressing thing to come out of reading The Grapes of Wrath for me is not the story of the family, which, by the way, if you're going to come and tell me that this book is depressing, after the first 2 chapters, if you've not fucking realized the kind of book that this is, that's on you. Because any book that has like a happily ever after ending, or a happy ending, or an uplifting ending, is not only doing it's not only presenting the situation falsely, it's presenting a false reality, but it is also doing an injustice to the people who lived through this and who underwent this, not fictionally, but in real life, to not present their struggle in a realistic light. So, no, it's not a happy story. But here's the thing, and this is, to me, the most depressing thing. Here we are, 90 years later almost. In 1939, this book was written. It's 2026. So, what is that, 87 years later, pretty much? And we're still having the same fucking problem. There is a point in this book where people are starving. People are actually starving. And there is fruit being produced on, the trees and whatnot. But because the fruit cannot be picked and sold for a profit, rather than give it away or sell it as a loss, the companies order it to be burned. And I looked this up. This is a real thing that happened. Produce was so abundant that even though you had all these starving people, production companies had their content burned, threw things in rivers, tossed them into spoil, entire crops of oranges, plums, peaches, destroyed in front of starving people, rather than let them have it. And while it's not, and that is just the most despicable fucking thing, and while it is not as bad as like literally food, I look at stuff like Warner Brothers canceling entire movies that have been made. They've been made, they're done, they've wrapped, they're edited, and they just cancel it and write it off as a tax write-off. Like, it still happens to this day, this level of complete insane greed. And that is the most depressing thing, that in almost 100 years, have we gotten better? I mean, yes, in a way. And I think the book does say, like, every time we slide back, we slide a little bit less back. So we move forward and then we slide back, but it's not as far back. And then we move forward and we slide back and it's not as far back. So yes, as things stand right now, companies canceling movies and books and, entertainment and whatnot, it is nowhere near as bad as literally starving to death. Yet. And I pray that this is this sort of turning point, and people start getting fed up with this, and we see things turn around for the better for a little bit until they inevitably come back again, and we don't backslide all the way into the sheer misery of The Grapes of Wrath. But anybody who reads The Grapes of Wrath, I think, in 2026 and is an adult should absolutely see present day America and a lot of the issues facing present day America reflected in this book. And that is why it is such a classic and why I was deeply surprised to find that I absolutely enjoyed it as much as I did. So it has definitely earned its reputation in my eyes. And I very much enjoyed reading it. And wow, great experience. And I really have to admire Steinbeck as an author, between both East of Eden and The Grapes of Wrath. Definitely worth their reputations. So join me next time when I talk about something maybe a little bit more cheerful.